Hello? Hi, David.
Hello, I'm here.
Hello. Okay, cool. All right. Let me just set my stuff up and close out everybody else's junk.
It's not
Screen
junk.
share. I'm sorry, repeat?
It's not junk.
No, I mean, I have a bunch of emails coming through and Zoom messages and everything else. So let me get to slideshow from the beginning.
You just got
And
more
I have
guidance from the SBA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I sent around the thing about the changes that are now being proposed in the Senate, which will get us rolling on another round.
Okay. Do you have the recording piece on your end that you can see or not?
Let me see. I'm not in it yet.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I got a request to be for potential new clients. I was about to look them up on the internet.
Awesome.
Yes, there is a recording. Hi, and welcome to another webinar by LB Goodman and Company. Today, we're going to be talking about data breaches and how to protect your business. Some scary stuff out there. We have some experts to share with you today. Just have a little disclaimer to share with you on the next slide that just tells you that information here can be changing frequently and that you should speak to your own expert before making any decisions about what you hear today. Let me introduce to you on the next slide our speakers. My name is David Goodman, and I am the Managing Director of LB Goodman and Company. We're a CPA firm. And today we have our experts. We have Bob Schiff, who is the founder and CEO of Cyberlytica, Inc. And Bob is going to be our primary presenter today. Along with Bob, we also have Rich Freeberg, who is a CPA, and that's how I know Rich. Known him for probably about 20 years. And he is the Director of Business Development for Cyberlytica. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to Bob, and I know that you will find this very revealing and very interesting presentation. So go ahead, Bob, you're on.
Thank you, David. Appreciate. As David mentioned, we're going to talk about today, what happens when your company was breached? Where does your data go? Does anyone really know? There's been so many data breaches lately, or the last couple of years, and I'll talk about a couple of them in a few minutes. But you know, your information goes somewhere, and I'm going to tell you exactly where you can find it. Next slide. It's actually on the internet's dark side. There's really two different internets out there. The information where your data is probably residing that might have been breached is what they call the dark web, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. So the internet actually, if you think of the internet as an iceberg, the very, very top or the tip of the iceberg is what we do every day. That's where we check our email. That's where our websites are. That's where we Google. That's where everything that we do on a day-to-day basis is done on the internet. And that's, again, the tip of the iceberg. It's only 4% of the actual internet, if you can believe it. The other 96%, which is a big percent, is what they call either the deep web or the dark web. Now, the deep web isn't necessarily a bad place. It's just really what it means is that there's a bunch of unindexed sites. So for example, if you're putting up a website and you don't want anyone to see it, you'll put it really on the deep web so no one can find it. Again, all it means is that it's unindexed websites. What we're going to talk about is below that, and that's the ugly dark side. And that's called the dark web. And that's where there's all kinds of illegal information, there's drug trafficking, and there's all kinds of things which I'm going to talk about over the next couple of minutes. Next slide. So you must be, before I even get going, you're probably thinking, well, who created this thing called the dark web? Well, like everything else, the government did. And it allowed them way back when, as a way to exchange information from spy to spy. The military actually designed it and developed it. And they actually put it out to the public in the 1990s for everyone to use. And that's where, you know, that's when bad things start to happen. Now, to get to the internet, to get to the dark web, you can't use your browser that you use today. You have to use something called Tor, which is known as the Onion router, I should say. And that's the browser that you would need to get into the dark web. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Next slide. So you must be wondering now, well, what's on the dark web? Well, everything you can think of. Since it's 90-somewhat% of the internet, there's a lot of stuff out there. But again, a lot of it's pretty bad stuff. And it looks like the internet that you and I use every day. It really doesn't look any different, just that you access it differently. And here's an example of a company called Silk Road. Now they're out of business. FBI shut them down. We have some screenshots of this. Think of it as Amazon. This is almost like an Amazon type site. You can buy cocaine, you can buy heroin, you can buy anything illegal. You can buy fireworks, you can buy, you name it. Anything illegal you can buy on this particular site. Now, the way it works is very similar to the way an Amazon or any e-commerce site works. You shop around. When you go to check out at the very end, in your shopping cart, you basically pay, instead of paying with your credit card, you're going to pay with a Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency. That's how you pay. And it gets delivered almost just like Amazon does the next day via Federal Express or US Mail or any way they ship it out on. So works like Amazon. I'm going to show you a couple other sites that are similar. If you go to the next slide. What else is on the dark web? Well, you could buy just about any sort of gun imaginable. Machine guns, all illegal guns, and some legal guns, but mostly illegal guns. Below that, you can buy a driver's license. Since David, you're in New Jersey, I gave you an example of a New Jersey driver's license with the hologram. And it's very inexpensive to buy a driver's license in New Jersey. It costs about 27 cents, which is ridiculous. One in Illinois, for example, goes for about 34 cents. So that's what it's going for. It's very inexpensive. It's very efficient, if you want to call it that. And it's everything you could think of is on there. Next slide. Well, the thing that we found on the dark web is your Zoom passwords, all 5 million of them. So Zoom, in fact, we're on a Zoom right now. They were breached a couple of months ago, and 500 million username and passwords were for sale on the dark web. And what you're seeing here on the right-hand side of the screen, that's actually the data that we found on the dark web. Obviously, we blocked it out. That's what it looked like. It came in all the usernames and passwords and IDs are available. And very inexpensively. You can buy all 500 million of them for about a penny each. Give you an idea of the cost of it. Next slide. What else is on the dark web? Well, there's all kinds of chat and forums. So this is an example of a forum that we found where someone was selling 538 million user records from a recent leak. And it went for really just a couple dollars. So there's lots of different chat rooms on the dark web. There's lots of information being passed back and forth on the dark web. A lot of the sites that information is dumped on is only up for maybe a few hours or a few days at most. So it goes up, people buy, they find out about it on these chat forums. They go in, they buy it, and then the chat room closes it down, and it's off the dark web, at least for a short period of time. Then it usually comes back on it. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So you have chat rooms, you have forums. Next slide, please. Here's a couple of another example where you can buy, again, we found where you can buy 2 state governments' usernames and passwords as the administrator. So for $80, go on the dark web and really get, I guess it's three for the price of 2, or 2 for the price of 3, I should say, for $80. That's username and all the credentials that a administrator would use in a particular state. Now, I'm not going to tell you what state this was, but it gives you an example of what's out there. I mean, username, password, admin passwords, it's all out there. It's all inexpensive. So for $80, just think of the havoc someone can create on a state website. They can take down court systems. They can take down police departments' information. I mean, it's amazing what they can do for $80. Next slide. Then there's Facebook. Believe it or not, the dark web has a Facebook site. Looks just like the Facebook that we use, probably use every day, except it's really underground. In other words, it's used for people that don't have access to, the internet per se. So they use the dark web for that. And then there's a Facebook, and people can communicate through their Facebook site on the dark web. Again, it looks exactly like, ours. Facebook actually put it on the dark web so people can communicate around the world in a safe manner. Next slide. Well, the other thing you probably think is, well, how much data is on the dark web? Well, there's literally trillions of records on the dark web. Just to give you an idea of when I say records, what that really means. Yahoo was breached a couple of years ago, and 3 billion records were put on the dark web. 3 billion. If you think about it, the entire planet only has 7 billion people. Give you an idea. Facebook was breached, and 885 million records were put on the dark web. What's a record? Well, your username, passwords, your chats, all your contacts, everything you do on Facebook was for sale. Marriott had a big breach, one of the biggest breaches, with 540 million. And then, of course, we had Sony, Target, and JP Morgan was breached a number of years back, the bank. And what went out on that was really your account number, username, passwords, and account numbers. So again, a lot of information. And just to give you a stat that we just got this morning, actually, in May alone, last month, with everyone working from home, there were 460 million records stolen. So that's almost as much as the biggest breaches that we ever had. So 460 million pieces of information. Again, it could be your username, your password, could be your medical records, are all out there for sale. Next slide. All right, so you must be wondering, okay, you told me there's a lot of information. Give me an example. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples right here. Adobe was breached in 2013. And what went out on the dark web is your email address, passwords, and usernames, and password hints. Forbes was breached a number of years back. I'm showing you a little bit older breaches. And basically 1 million compromised accounts. What was out there? Username, passwords, user websites, usernames and passwords. And what the hackers did, not only did they steal that, they started putting bad information on Forbes.com. In other words, they were making up their own articles and putting it on Forbes, and call that, I guess, fake news. LinkedIn, we all use LinkedIn most likely. 164 million passwords and email addresses were stolen. At Experian, same sort of thing. But not only was your username and password out there for sale, but your income levels, your home address, your birthdays, family structure, IP addresses, phone numbers, and purchasing habits. So as you can see, there's, each breach is a little unique, but there's a lot of information on each one of them. Next slide. And just when you thought Dropbox was a safe place to put all your information, well, they were. They were breached in 2012. 68 million pieces of information or username and passwords were for sale. And once that goes for sale, whatever you had in Dropbox is now available, to buy. A little scary, right? Okay, let's take it to the next slide. And you must be wondering, well, how much does this information cost? Well, it doesn't really cost very much. To give you an example, your social security number actually goes for less than $1 these days. You can set up a fake Facebook account for under $1. Your credit cards, again, depending on your credit limits, could go as high as $60 or as low as 25 cents. So as you can see, it's pretty inexpensive, as I'm showing you here, and as I showed you in a couple other examples before. If you take it to the next slide. So if you take everything about you, your usernames, your passwords, where you live, your address, your gender, everything that you could think about you, that could be for sale, you're only worth under $1,200 on the dark web today. So for $1,200, I can buy everything about you, which, if you ask me, is a pretty scary thought. Okay, next slide. Now, it became so sophisticated, the dark web is so sophisticated, they actually have a price index, like everything else is indexed, and it changes every week. So every week a report comes out. This is one page of literally hundreds and hundreds of pages. To give you an example, on the bottom left-hand side, you could buy a Google email account for about $1.55. You can choose what username and password you want. Your Bank of America card goes for about $100 based on your credit limit. Could be $100, could be $500, depending again what your credit limit may be. Your PayPal accounts, if you use PayPal, can go as low as a few cents to as high as $52. Maybe a little bit more again, depending on what balance you have. So as you can see, and I'll leave this on for a second, there's a lot of information that's out there that's for sale. And again, it literally changes every week. The more breaches that there are, and there's been a lot of breaches, it drives the price down. Less breaches, price goes back up. So it literally changes every week, and it's an index that the hackers use so they know what their information may be worth. Next slide. So you're probably wondering, okay, that's all very good and scary, but why is that important to me as a business owner? Well, your employees probably use the same password for multiple accounts. They probably use their same password for possibly your network, your payroll, HR system, your IP databases, your CRM systems. They can buy that password on the dark web for, as you just saw, for literally pennies. So they have these programs out there, right? If they want to get into your account, they can figure out your username pretty easy, and they run the system, and it basically runs a database of millions and millions of names, of passwords, I should say, and eventually they'll most likely will hit it and find it. So that's why changing password is probably the most important things you can tell your employees. And really, it's a pretty interesting stat. On the right-hand side, 87% of people between the ages of 18 and 30 use the same password for everything. Scary, right? And 81% of people use the same password for ages 31 and up. So if you're 30, 40 years old, you might be, there's an 80% chance of using that same password for many different programs. There's so many different passwords that we have to use every day. It's hard to, change them, make them different. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's really, really important that you change passwords, on a monthly or at least a quarterly basis. And just on the left-hand side, again, on the bottom, what can happen, when someone gets your username and password, is extortion, there's ransomware, there's malware, there's viruses. All kinds of things can happen when a bad guy has your username and password. Next, please. So you're probably wondering, well, what can I do to protect my business? Well, there are some things you can do. First of all, you want to limit the access that you give your employees to your data. If an employee shouldn't have data to a specific system, don't give them access to it. What I find in especially smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies, a lot of people have access to data they probably should not have access to. So make sure you limit that. You should always patch your operating system. So whether you're using Windows or iOS or whatever operating system you may be using, or whatever system or whatever application you're using, make sure you upgrade regularly and patch your operating system. Now, I believe it was Equifax was breached because they didn't upgrade their operating system, and that's what caused that particular breach. Make sure, especially today, I can't talk about this enough, make sure you're using encryption, VPN, to secure sensitive business information. That's for your employees that may be working from home or working from work when they go back. You must use VPN. You must use, encryption. Computer encryption is the most important thing you can do. And you have to train your employees regularly. And phish your employees. Send out an email. An email that looks like a real email, and see who clicks on it. You can get an idea just right there of what your exposure is. All it takes is one person to click on an email that can compromise your entire system. So training is, totally, one of the most important things you can do. And definitely phish your employees. Not every week, maybe once a month, once a quarter, but definitely not once a year. It needs to be done, more often. As I mentioned before, you have to change passwords often and make them strong. You should have a character, using upper and lowercase, a symbol. And to the right here on the bottom here, give you an example of a password. This is a little long, but to give you an idea, upper, lower, make them long, using alphanumeric symbols, etc. So, and change them. They should be changed, like I said before. Most companies don't change them monthly. You may want to do it quarterly, but do it often. Okay, next slide, please. The last thing we want you to do is become a statistic. To give you an idea, believe it or not, that half the small businesses today in America have already been breached. And 60% of those businesses that have been breached go out of business within 6 months. Very, very scary. And what happens is when you're breached, what the attackers do, they actually sit on your network for about 146 days, and they're watching you. They're watching you, what systems you have access to, what your passwords are, where your IP is, where your bank accounts are, what your account numbers may be. So they wait about a good 146 days on average, and then they go in at once and attack everything, and it's too late. By that time, you could be out of business. And to give you an idea of how many records are stolen on an hourly basis, believe it or not, 158,000 records are sold on average per hour. That comes down to about 44 records every single second of every single day. So as you can see right here, it's very dangerous. There's a lot you can do to protect yourself, which we just spoke about. But one last thing on this particular slide is that 80% of malware is sent to your employees via email. Again, as I mentioned before, make sure your employees are trained and not to click on certain emails, which they should be trained and taught what to click and what not to click on. Alrighty, next email, please. Slide, I should say. All right, a little bit about Cyberlytica. We're New York City based. We have about 100 years of experience. We have a strong management team with a lot of experience in cybersecurity, systems, human resources. Our system is an outsourced system, so there's nothing you have to do. We do the entire setup for you. To get someone up and going with Cyberlytica takes about 15 minutes. Implementations are fast. Half our revenue goes back into R&D. Some of the products that we have is we monitor the dark, deep web for you. We do a 7-year audit. We go back 7 years to see what might have been breached over the last 7 years, so you can possibly do something about it. We have phishing simulations where we do send out phishing emails to your employees to see who clicks and a report on that. Every single client of ours has their own branded training portal with lots of videos and lots of great information on what to do, on the internet. We have quizzes, videos, we have reporting. Some of the other services that we have to offer is we offer on-site training if needed. We do executive board consulting. We do human resource, cybersecurity training for human resource executives. And if you're in New York City or New York State, we now actually have a product that really protects you from well, not protects you, but gives you compliance on the New York State Shield Act that just went into effect, I believe was June 1st officially, where fines could really be up to like $250,000 if you're not compliant. All right, let's take it to the next slide. To contact us, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email. That's our contact information. You can check out our website at cyberlytica.com. We've got a lot of great information. I encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Bob. That was really great. I got some questions for you. Hopefully you've got some answers to help people understand a little bit more about what you shared with us about the dark web. So one of the questions is, can the government track me on the dark web?
The answer is both yes and no. When I say yes, if you're using a Tor browser or one of the browsers to access the darknet and it's not up to date, the government can track you. Or if you're using a very inexpensive VPN that might have been free, they can actually track you relatively easily. But if you're using encryption, if you're using an up-to-date browser, it is hard for them to track. But there's been a lot of arrests, based on the FBI, et cetera, tracking down people on the dark web.
Yeah, I don't know why anybody would want to go there in the first place. Not only to do something that's probably illegal, but also could get themselves into deeper trouble. I'm assuming by exposing themselves to whatever is on the dark side of that dark web.
Yeah, I agree, David. It's not a place you want to go. Okay,
right.
But there's a lot of sites out there that if you click could really bring on malware to your computer. So it's a place you don't want to go, but be aware it's out there.
Good to know. Thanks. You talked about Bitcoin, but can I use my credit card on the dark web?
Well, the last thing you probably want to do is use your credit card if you're buying something illegal. So the only way they take your money is really through cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin. Again, the last thing you want to do is buy something illegal using your credit card. I guarantee within minutes you'll get a knock on your door from the FBI. So not a good idea.
Right. So if I was willing to take the risk, how do you find websites on the dark web to visit?
That's another good question, David. It's very hard. Okay, the URLs aren't like a typical, URL like cyberlytica.com or whatever, google.com. It's a long string of alphanumeric numbers and letters, and at the end of it, it's .onion. So it's very hard to find. In other words, you can't go onto like a Google search and say, tell me where I can find heroin, for example. It's not going to work. The dark web does have a search engine, but it's very limited to what it can do. You really need to know where you're going and what site to access. It's hard to navigate around. I mean, if you Google enough information out there, you might find something, but again, not very easy to get to, which is probably for you and I a good thing.
Right. So you shared with us how much data is on the dark web. I find out that my passwords out there, my social security numbers out there, there's personal information on that dark web that people can use to impersonate me, to get credit out of my name, to steal from me. How do I get my information off of the dark web?
Well, the bad news is you can't.
Oh.
Once it's on there, it's on there. And what happens is that once it's on there, it's sold over and over and over again. So even though you might be on one particular site, you actually may be on 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 different sites. So it's virtually impossible. What I do recommend, though, is get a good identity theft package, such as a LifeLock or a 360 ID. There's a bunch of really good ones out there. I recommend doing that. But once it's on there, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do. So what you want to do is make sure that, whatever information you have is stored in a good way, and make sure, again, your passwords are changed frequently. That's the best advice I probably can give you.
Great. Well, you've
Another
given
thing
us.
I think you should you certainly do is freeze your credit. You go on to Experian or Equifax or TransUnion, freeze your credit. The worst thing could happen is, you go buy a new car or something, you got to remember to unfreeze it, for a period of time. But it's far better than finding out and getting a credit report, finding out that you have 37 other loans and mortgages you were not aware of.
That's good advice. And so we're dealing with businesses is what this webinar is directed to. And we're concerned that business information can get sucked into the dark web. Employees need to be protecting themselves. You shared with us some great ideas on how to do that. Businesses do really need to be concerned about that. You talked about even recent breaches, right?
Oh yeah, no, businesses should be very, very concerned about it. It could bring a company down. It literally could bring a company down in no time. And what we're going to offer people that are viewing this today is, if you go to cyberlytica.com, you can actually do a free dark web search to see if your passwords are on the dark web. So if you put your password in there, and it's 100% safe, you don't keep any of the data. It's actually it goes to the dark web. It's checking to see if that password is out there. If it comes back that it's out there, the next thing you should do is change your password immediately, because that's, that could be a big breach. So we're offering that tool for free. Check it out again, cyberlytica.com. Go to free dark web scan and see if your information is out there.
This has been really great. Is there any final words you want to share with us before we sign off?
No, just say, there's a lot you can do, but you need to be aware of what's happening. So make sure, as I said before, make sure you change passwords all the time. Make sure your software is upgraded. Make sure you have any patches, that everything is patched up. And if you do all that, it really could bring that threat level down.
Great. And if you don't know how to do it, they're experts just like you guys right there. Cyberlytica is a great place to go to get that help. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right.
And we find the best thing to do is to just be proactive, be aware, and understand that the criminals are far smarter than us. They always have been, they are now, and they probably always will be. So you have to take the proactive steps that you should be taking, that we've recommended that you do.
Great parting words. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you being here and sharing this important information. And people can follow up directly with you if they have any questions. You have contact information right here on the last slide. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rich, for joining us today.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.